difficult times. I'll tell you another little thing about the neighborhood. In St. Margaret's Church, down the hill, there's a room in the back with a cry room. That's where parents can take their noisy kids so they don't disturb others during Mass. So in the back of this cry room, they used to have a statue of the Sacred Heart. And Jesus had one hand over his heart, and his other hand extended in blessing, like this. So one day there was a little boy in St. Margaret's Church who had one of these nuclear toddler meltdowns. And his mom swoops him up, brings him into the cry room, and almost instantly, he got quiet. Mom was like, what is this miracle here? Because you bottled the air and took it with me. Well, the kid was staring at the statue. He was just enthralled. And after a few seconds, he wriggled out his right arm, and he held it out to the statue. And then in his little voice, he said, "Hi, God. Hi, God." He thought Jesus was waving, so he waved back. Whatever was bothering that little boy, whatever was causing him to be so upset, once he saw that he was in the presence of God, he was in peace. And we can have that same childlike faith if we pray to God and learn of his presence and have an attitude of joy. The second thing we need to be ministers, missionaries, if you will, of the gospel, is education. We need to learn our faith in order to love our faith and to live our faith. So it's important to go to class, get involved in Bible studies, practice in your youth groups, in your high schools. Learn the faith. Learn why we believe what we believe. Jesus was always teaching. He taught on roads, he taught in markets, he taught in deserts, he taught on mountains, he taught on boats. He was always teaching, taking every opportunity to lead people to the truth. So that's what we want to do. We want to proclaim the truth and learn the truth and share it in love. We don't want to cause fights. You know, if you were to see a great movie, you wouldn't tell your friends like, "Oh man, the new Bond movie, Skyfall's the most awesome thing, have to go see it. It's really, really good." That's what you'd normally say. You wouldn't say, "Man, if you don't go see Skyfall, you're going to hell." Like, you wouldn't say that, right? So we don't want the truth to come across like hitting people over the head. We want to share the truth in love. But we have to speak the truth. We have to be educated and speak it in all times and in all places. Because we want to be able to lead others to the truth. And remember, it's not our truth, it's God's. Never once in my life did I have a math teacher who said, you know, 2 plus 2 is 4. If you want it to be 5, it's okay. I'm sorry, it can't be 3, but if you want to make it 3, we can call it 3. For you, it can be 3. No, there is an answer. There is a truth. And we have to proclaim and share that truth. Because we shouldn't be embarrassed by sharing people what is divine revelation. But in order to speak the truth, we need to embrace the truth and live the truth and learn the truth. And the last thing that we need, along with prayer and education, is love. An attitude of joy in all times and in all places. To know the power of the cross. To know the joy of the resurrection. We need to share that love that Jesus came to bring. To love your neighbor as yourself. Even to love your enemies. 2 great examples of love that I've seen in my life. 2 examples of love that led me to become a priest. One comes from my uncle, who was a priest of the Archdiocese of New York. His name was Father Bill Creven, and he was a pastor in the poorest parishes you could find. He was at St. Thomas the Apostle in Harlem, which has since closed. He was at Resurrection in Harlem, which has since been made a chapel. For 13 years, he was at All Saints Parish in Harlem. And he loved serving the poor, and he loved the faith, and he loved his people. And he was such a great example of love of God and love of God's people that he inspired my vocation to the priesthood and my brother's. My brother's also a priest. His name is Father Kevin O'Reilly. He's the academic dean at St. Joseph's Seminary. So that one example of love was a great inspiration to both of us. And maybe there are vocations in this room. I'm sure there are, even beyond the seminarians that are here. Think about serving God and serving God's people as a religious priest, brother, sister, whatever it might be. So an example of true love, opening up our hearts to what God calls us to be, is a great way of experiencing love. And the other example of love that was an inspiration to me was a man whose name I don't even know. For a number of years, I worked at a nursing home, St. Patrick's Home on Van Cortlandt Park South. I was a security guard. Now, when people hear that, they're like, oh, security guard in the Bronx, must be tough. Well, keep in mind, it was security guard at a nursing home. Security at a nursing home isn't keeping people out, it's keeping people in. In any event, there was a guy who would come every day to see his wife. He'd take a bus, and he'd walk past the front desk, and he'd tip his cap. And then he'd take the elevator upstairs, and he would feed breakfast to his wife. Then he would take her to the 10 o'clock mass. Then he would feed her lunch. Then he would sit with her watching television all afternoon. Then he would feed her dinner. And then when the nurses put her back to bed, he would come down the elevator, and he would use something. Now, younger people probably have never heard of this, but they used to have things called payphones. Put a quarter in, and he could make a phone call. Well, this man would call himself a cab. We used to call cabs for people at the front desk all the time. He would call himself a cab, and then he would walk past the chapel, bless himself, tip his cab, and then go home. And he'd do it again the next day, and the next day, and every day. I found out from the Carmelite sisters who run that nursing home that he and his wife had been married for 67 years. Not only that, she suffered from dementia. She didn't even know who he was, but he was there anyway. He was so grounded in the love of his wife and the love of Jesus Christ, he knew that that's where he was meant to be, no matter if his wife knew it or not. That example was a shining example of God's love to the religious sisters, to the visitors, to the residents. And the thing is, the guy was there every day. He never signed the book. I never learned his name, but I've never forgotten his example. An example of love rooted in Jesus Christ, knowing that we can be joyful even when things are difficult. We can remember the cross and remember the destruction of death and the promise of eternal life. That when things are great, when things are bad, if our attitude is joyful, we can conquer anything. Many of us even wear crosses, right? You have crosses in your rooms and things like that. Well, I'll finish up with a little story about a guy I met years ago. He himself was a security guard. So I was talking to him, and as we're talking, I noticed he was wearing a chain. And around the end of the chain, I expected to see a cross, but instead, he was wearing a bullet. And I was trying to talk with the guy without staring at the bullet, but I just couldn't. I kept looking down at it. You know that scene in the movie Austin Powers where the guy has the big mole? And Austin Powers is like, mole. Well, I couldn't help staring at this bullet. It was like, bullet. I wasn't cool about it at all. So the guy just looks at me and says, you want to know the story? I said, yeah, now I gotta say yes. So he says that he was a corrections officer in New Jersey. And his job was to drive prisoners from the jailhouse to the courthouse and back for their appearances. He said it was a no-brainer job. The prisoners were cuffed when he got there, and then the bailiffs took them out of the car. He just drove back and forth. He was a taxi driver, basically. And he had a college degree. And people would invite him and say, you know, maybe you should take a test to become a state trooper, become a detective or something like that. But he was like, that's too hard. I don't want to apply myself. I'm just happy driving this car. So one day, just regular day, he drives up to the courthouse, gets out of the car, opens the door for the prisoner. He's getting back in the car when suddenly a hand grabs him by the throat. The prisoner had gotten out of the cuffs. The next thing, he feels a gun to his head. The prisoner had snuck a gun out of the jail. So now he's in front of the courthouse with a crazed prisoner with a gun to his head. And now all the other cops and people are there, they pull out their guns. Looks like some Quentin Tarantino movie. Everyone's screaming, waving guns around, and nobody knows what's going to happen. This could be like this horrible bloodbath. So one cop on the scene tries to take action. He sneaks around the side of the police car, and he tries to tackle the prisoner. And as he's doing so, the gun goes off. But the bullet misfired. It just made a popping sound, and and the bullet never fired. So now, they all fall on the ground. The driver's on the bottom, the prisoner's in the middle, and the cop is on top. So the driver's looking up, and he sees the cop pull the prisoner off of him. And as the cop is trying to secure the prisoner, the driver's looking up, and the prisoner frees his arm, points it right in his face, and fired again. And that bullet misfired. The prisoner then dropped the gun on the street while he was cuffed by the police officer. And that driver reached over, and he opened the chamber, and he took out one of the 2 misfired bullets. And that's the one he wears around his neck. When he finished that story, my jaw was on the floor. I was like, and he just rolled his eyes, he looked up to heaven, and he said, I'm on borrowed time. God wanted me to live. And that's why we wear crosses. That's why we gaze upon crosses, because we're all on borrowed time. Christ had given us a little bit of time here on earth, and he wanted us to live. That cross was the bullet that Christ took to save us from death. And now we live for him, through him, with him, and in him. So when we want to show our joy, we want to have that attitude of joy, we can always remember the great victory of Jesus Christ. Whether we show that joy by singing and dancing, by preaching and teaching, we can show our joy in any way. But through prayer, through education and love, we can bring the message of Christ's victory to the entire world. And so rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice.